We'd like to acknowledge the land in which we live, work, and raise our families and live our day-to-day lives. We pay tribute to the many diverse First Nations, Inuit, Métis people that were the original stewards of this land. We'd also like to acknowledge those who came here involuntarily, forcibly displaced Africans, brought here because of the transatlantic slave trade. The CEE team is grateful for the opportunity to utilize this space in delivering our services to support and empower the Black community that now calls the city home. We also want to show our appreciation to the City of Toronto for their support in this meaningful project. So today I'm joined by some pretty powerful and wonderful women to have this conversation. I'm going to open up the floor, and why don't you just share a little bit about yourself and the work that you do?
Okay, I can start. So happy to be here. My name is Biliana. I'm currently program manager here at CEE, but I've been working in the nonprofit sector for over 10 years now. And I've done work in a lot of different spaces, immigration, refugee work, and my passion has always been working with youth. So I'm really excited to be here and to contribute to this conversation.
Hi, my name is Bunmi Ehigiator. I am the social supports manager here at CEE. It is a privilege to honestly be able to lead such a great team to continue to do the work that we do on a daily basis. I have been in the social services field for over 20 years and been working with youth for about 5 years now. It's meaningful work, it's needed work, and I feel blessed on a daily basis to be able to continue to, contribute whatever I can to the work. So, thanks.
What about you, Shequita?
Hi, folks. My name is Shequita Thompson-Reid, she, her pronouns. And I've been doing this work for well over 18, 19 years now. And it's such a gift to work with young people, be in spaces, being a young person in the city growing up and knowing about programming. And so I've done this work across various spaces, housing, first and primary, and then VAW, violence against women, gender, looking at how the impacts of young people and now in the homeless space, and looking at how programming really infuses the development of young people. So looking forward to this chat.
Thank you for joining us for this conversation. My name is Trynée, and I have the honor of working here at CEE Centre for Young Black Professionals, specifically in the Sector Leadership Department. And so just looking forward to this full conversation. I'll start with a question. From your experiences and opinions, what are some important pieces that must be considered before starting youth programming?
Yeah, I think we've been running away from this, but in school we learn about the 4 whys, and I think that's where we start, or the 4 W's, I should say, the who, what, when, where, how. And I think that's where we start with programming. You start by asking yourself, who are we serving? Where are they at? Mentally, where are they at? Educationally, all of the different aspects of their lives. And I think those questions will eventually lead us to what do we need to make sure we have in programming so that we are, meeting the needs of the youth that are going to be participating in it. So I think that's where we start, and I know that's very broad, but from there you narrow it down depending on who your population is, and in this case, specifically dealing with Black youth. What are their background? What are the different things that they've dealt with in their lives? And then from there, moving on and incorporating that in your programming.
Yeah. I think similarly, I really love that entry point into it. I also think about knowing the community. Community context is so vital to any program. So I may say, I really love working in this space, but what are the needs of that community, to your point, right? What's been the historical context connected to that community, and what purpose will the program serve, I think are some really essential pieces. And then absolutely you can add and bolster that with any academic research, but also talking to the community, like actually getting on the ground, asking folks what, like focus groups, informal conversations. The best research I did was at the grocery store with the aunties, you know, and those are always really great space that gives us such insight around the needs, right? So those are some starting points, and then you do your needs assessment, your gaps analysis, all of those pieces, but starting with the folks who are most impacted, and then working your way around it.
I love those insights. Bunmi, what do you think?
I think they both already basically said what I was going to say. With anything that needs to be done or that you sense might be needed, I think it's necessary to approach the community first. That is this actually what you want? And what is it that you actually want? What are the needs, and how can we meet the needs, in your own opinion? And I think that's something that is always appealed to me, about CEE's story. They spent a year doing research about the community and asking youth, what do you need? What are the problems that this community is having, and how can we support you? And I think that's something that it's really necessary to do when you're serving a community. Ask them what they need from you, so that you know that you are meeting the needs that actually are needed, not just doing something for the sake of doing it.
I really like those approaches, and I think that oftentimes when people are crafting things for youth, they think they know best because they were youth at one time. And I think acknowledging that there's vast changes that occur from generation to generation, and allowing youth to have input into a process is so meaningful. However you come at the idea, whether you say I have this experience, connecting to the youth at some point to see if they want that experience is vital to not only the success of your program, because I don't think that's the marker of success, but how the youth are engaging with it is the marker, right? So I think that thank you for those answers. I love them. So from there, maybe let's talk about what aspects are key to making sure Black youth can access your programming, and how important is it to account for their different lived experiences?
I can start with this one. I think it's really important to be able to speak to youth even before they start programming, even when you're doing the outreach, to understand the barriers that they might be experiencing in order to access programming. Because then, at least for my team, they're prepared and they know what it is that they need to support the prospective program participant, so that they are able to access program whenever programming starts. A lot of times we see issues with transportation, being able to access transportation to where they need to be for programming, for the different trainings that they need to engage in order for them to meet the programming expectations. And so it's really important, even from the interview phase, even from the outreach phase, to kind of start to know that those are the barriers that the people that are going to be participating are experiencing, so that the people facilitating the programs are well prepared in being able to meet those needs ahead of time, so that you as the program facilitator are not being met with needs that you're not prepared to meet, because it's really important to know those things so that the program is successful. And so the people that you're inviting to be participants, you're setting them up for success, because those needs are anticipated, therefore you're prepared to meet them.
I think it's a lovely point. I think it's so important also, one, to have centering young people's needs by having a committee. So any program that you have has to be guided and directed with the folks who are most at the core of it. And so that will give you your on-the-ground insights as to how we can be agile and adaptable. Oftentimes there are barriers connected to if young people have siblings that they need to take care of, right? And it conflicts with program timing, right? Those are some barriers that may be challenges into how to be accessible. There, food insecurity, all of those pieces, right? Can we pay young people for their participation, having paid experiences? So that they can actually be intentional in participating, right? And looking at that as a value added, right? And so it's not just folks are recipients of services, but it's an exchange in it. I think are some really important places that really are helpful. Yeah.
And I think I'll just add to the accessibility piece, because I think it's something that as the Black community, we don't really talk about. So yes, when we're talking about accessibility, we're talking about location and where our youth can access these. But I also think that we have to think about, them being able to receive the materials and the level at which we are teaching those materials. I think those conversations are often skipped. And I think in my experience, I've noticed that people don't engage with the materials because they just can't relate to it, because they don't see themselves in it, or it's just that they're at a different learning level. So taking that into consideration in terms of accessibility, taking into consideration the different developmental disabilities that might be present in a group of youth, the mental capacity at which they can take in information, and also the method that we're actually delivering it. So is it just videos? Is this something that you're bringing in different speakers to speak? And how is that influencing the youth? And I think the pandemic taught us really well the importance of making sure that there are different ways of learning. And I think that was actually, you take the good from the bad, but I think in terms of programming, that is one thing that we took in making sure that now, where programming was just in person before, we were able to shift into an online presence and do it so well. And we've been able to see just how many more youth have now been able to participate, because it's simply that they could not be at a physical location before. And then also thinking about, it's a video now, we can have captions going at the bottom. Like so many different things that I just think we were not considering before, we are doing now. And I think we need to continue to do them in making programs more accessible.
I also will add that it's the opportunity not to be an institution, right? To be able to work with people from so many different lived experiences is an opportunity and privilege. And I think if you have a narrow mind in crafting programming that you're delivering it one way, you are missing that opportunity, right? And then one other thing that I'll add, I'll shout out to Matthias. From my first conversation with Matthias, he shared a gem with me of his experience that when working with youth, it's his job to move obstacles out of the way so that they can thrive within programming. And to Bumi's point, that's literally Bumi's work, is how can I move some things for you, right? And so I just shout out that 360 view of making programming accessible, right? What are the little things that we can move so that you can breathe within this programming, that you can thrive within this programming, right? And that those ways we know we're doing it right? Rather than our programming is successful. It's what does the health of the individuals within that programming look like? Okay, so let's talk about how do we design to infuse diversity and inclusion into making sure that the overall wellness of Black youth is considered throughout programming? So it's a pretty multi-layered question.
So I'll start that off. It's definitely multi-layered. I think one of the things that are really key consideration is that all intersections of Blackness exist in programming, right? And so how are all of our social identities and markers of our identities present, and we can show up as our full selves? So what does it mean for Black, queer, trans youth who are also maybe disabled? How can they access our programs in full ways? And so how, as we're moving through that, what are the conditions that we create to foster and cultivate that so folks can thrive? And that Black experience is not a monolith, right? There are so many layers and diversities within that, right? Afro Latinx community members may need something different from West African youth, may need something different from, youth who are rural or in town or in different spaces and context, and all of those layers together exist, right? And even young people within the same community are also different. So all of our markers and our social locations really is taking that identity-specific programming that really builds a care plan around you, right? And so I think in my time, especially in working in housing and shelter, really having care plans that worked and met young people where they were at. So young people came in and we talked fully and authentically about what are your needs, right? You're gonna be with us for some time. How do we make this work for you? Right? And with you, and how do you drive this and build something that they are participants and active drivers in? And I think when we start there, all of the elements of programming fall into place, right? So those are some things.
I can speak a little bit to that. My way of doing this work is do with and not do for. So I think it's really important to walk alongside our youth as they're going through the journey of programming. And I definitely am a big, just like, I really believe in intersectionality approach. When I found out about it, I remember finding out about it for the first time, like, oh my gosh, that explains so much. And, the intersectionality of our experiences makes every single person so unique and their needs so unique that it's really important to meet each person where they are and treat each person as an individual. And so while we are very diverse and, there's a lot of cultures within the Black community, even when you're from the same culture, your way that your lived experience is very different from the person next to you, even if you are from the exact same culture. So that the individuality that goes into serving each youth is very important. And so that's why, the work that my team does is very important, alongside, facilitation and, doing the curriculum that, happens with programming, because we get to have that journey as, and with each individual youth. And have the counseling sessions and know exactly what's going on so that we can support whatever the journey is for that particular person. And I think integrating all of those things makes us able to meet the needs of the person when it comes to the diversity and the multicultural aspect of meeting people's needs. I hope I answered the question.
Absolutely. I think what I would contribute to this is that often in Canada, we're told a story, right? We aren't given space to have our story and our history live and breathe for itself. And I think that when you create spaces for certain people, you need to not only allow them, but also kind of teach them that it's okay to own your history, because we know that how colorful our history and our family stories are, and we hold them for ourselves. But it's okay to breathe life into that and let it be a part of who you are, right? Because everyone else is free to do so, but we're, in Canada specifically, we're tied to the stories that are told for us. So I think that actually is in the work that we do here, we have a very talented storyteller, Ivano, who works with our youth to tell their impact stories when they're ready to and when they want to. And you can see that work in the Black Youth Can campaign, reclaiming your story. So I think often the term or the phrase like infusing diversity and inclusion can seem like, are we checking all the boxes? But it could just be allowing folks to come into their own. And it's a beautiful thing when you see it, when you see that happen.
I think if I can add one thing, it's like also leaving room in your program to shape or to allow things to take shape as they would. Because oftentimes we're going to plan something because we have our targeted audience, we know exactly who we're going for. But then you're met with something else once you start programming, and you're met with now different things that are coming up for folks. And so how do you just make sure that your programming is flexible enough and you allow it to take shape? And if you need to shift something, you shift it because you want to make sure that at the end of the day, the youth are getting what they need. And I think you both spoke to it, but that's person-centered approach, right? Making sure that it's individual to each person and making sure that, again, you're meeting their needs. So yeah, just wanted to add that there.
Love that. Okay, so what steps can be taken to address or rectify gaps in the wellness aspect of programming that negatively impact outcomes for Black program participants?
I think we also do that really well, but in terms of steps that could be taken just to make sure that wellness is addressed, I think it goes back to like a holistic approach to programming as well. So you're not just thinking about, maybe the technical side of programming, which is something that we do here. We have a technical side where we are teaching them tangible skills that they need to have, whether it's film, editing skills, whether it's finance, but also thinking about, okay, what are the other power skills that they might need to make sure that they are, ready and prepared to go into the workforce. And I think that goes into the holistic now, right? So now we're thinking about, okay, maybe they've never had an interview before. They've never had that aspect. So how do we teach them about being confident in themselves, being confident in the skills that they have? How do we teach them about speaking about themselves highly? So I think building confidence, this work is so beyond just, how can I put it? It's so beyond just maybe like a
Job readiness.
Yeah.
or skill building.
Yeah.
It's also confident building. It's also bringing up a person. It's also teaching them about who they are and having them discover who they are, and teaching them about, different skills pretty much to help them stand on their own.
Shequita, I want to actually color this question for you because you are so, if you don't know Shequita, this is a small piece of her toolkit is evaluation. And from an outside perspective, this can seem like a little tiny, piece of sliver of the pie of that evaluation. How can you, when you find things like this in evaluation, how can you push the needle to make it have a huger impact on your programming?
So for me, when thinking about a couple of things, to your question around how do we promote wellness as part of programming, I think normalizing therapy. Normalizing that it is okay that we have had traumatic experiences and we need to navigate and cope with that, and shifting our programmatic structures so it centers the full person, right? So and I say this knowing that our funding models do not quite support this, but let's dare to dream and do something within that. So I think about how do we create space in all our programming where there's critical self-reflection that is happening, where there's access to therapy, right? Where we're demystifying what therapy means and looks like, right? And where it's connected in tangible ways to our outcomes. So in evaluation, when we're looking at what are the conditions of well-being that have been supported and improved on our social determinants of health, well-being means looking at your holistic self, right? And so I think about sometimes we add on the technical components to things, but if young people are experiencing harm in the world. Anti-black racism exists, and we know that. And so if those things haven't been addressed and we haven't had an opportunity to process that, it'll show up in oftentimes unresolved ways because we know the world has not been structured or set up for Black youth to thrive, right? And so I love spaces that can talk about that and then put it as, outcome measures where we're like, we have increased capacity in this area to understand identity and self. And so having culturally responsive therapy and care is so important to holistic programming.
I think making sure to make space for wellness within programming is very important. I think, everyone has shared, it's really important to normalize a lot of the wellness that is needed within our community. Therapy is very much important, and we do need to normalize it and destigmatize it so that it's not something that is seen as done when someone is in crisis. It's something that is done just like you need to go get a physical. While it's an uphill battle, I have to admit that fully, I think being able to find ways of being creative about integrating it into our curriculum is really important. One of the ways that we've done it is having part of our curriculum being facilitated by our full-time psychotherapist. She's facilitating mental wellness workshops as a part of our curriculum. And she does this throughout programming, periodically, so that it actually is kind of group therapy, but our participants just see it as a workshop. But we have seen such value in doing that, because a lot of times our youth, will say they need therapy, and then when it really comes time to actually follow through, it doesn't happen. So we had to find other ways to bring the wellness to our participants. And so that's one of the ways that we found that actually works. And we see a difference in our outcome because of the way we've been able to integrate it into our curriculum. And we hope that we can just keep on finding ways of integrating, the expertise of people that practice psychotherapy into the way we do our programming, so that if the traditional way of having one-on-one sessions is not happening, there is still a way to bring the benefits of what they have to offer into the lives of the youth that we serve. So, and that is something that is a continuous, journey that we're going to have to take with our youth until, and we're just going to have to be creative about the way we serve them so that we can bring them what they need. And we're going to keep having those conversations with them too, to see if what we're doing is working and if we need to try something else to meet their needs. So I think it's just something that is just an ongoing journey.
Yeah, I think it's so they often say that your ways of being will be solidified within you at a certain age. And that certain age changes depending who you're talking to. I've heard 7, I've heard 15. But if you've never been introduced to mental wellness, and then as an adult, you have to break all of that down. It's so heavy and it's such a long road, but it's fulfilling because we know we carry a lot from all different angles. So the other thing I will just say is you all work in very critical places in a youth's life, whether it's those struggling with unhousing or those trying to find a place of belonging and a trajectory in their life. And I just commend you for allowing them to be their full selves and supporting them, because to support that work, it means a lot. You hold a lot, right? And you're trying to solve a lot of things at many times. And so just creating opportunities for youth to figure things out is just, it's transformative. We've seen it in all the work that you guys do, how transformative that can be. So I just commend you all for that. My next question is, what features or experience do you think are critical to have built into programming to cater to different learning and communication styles? How can you keep them present as well?
I think I touched on this earlier, but one thing that's important to do is to evaluate the learning styles of everyone that's in your group, and I mean every single person, because again, they're all so different. And there's so many learning style tests that you can find, even online, but I think in being culturally relevant, also thinking about how you're delivering that test to your youth, but firstly finding out what is their learning styles. And then I think if that's done early on in programming, then that's something that could be adapted in. And like I said, again, making sure that your programming is not just a one-way fits all, but that it's adaptable. And I think what I've seen in the past is we take that test, we take those results, and we apply it right away. So if more people are like, hey, I'm not able to understand because all I'm seeing is someone speaking in front of me. Can I have a PowerPoint presentation because I'm a visual learner? Incorporating that into it. And I think how we sustain that is, you do it at the beginning, you do it in the middle, and you do it at the end, because that allows you to see, to evaluate progress and to evaluate whether or not your methods are actually working. So I think being progressive with it, and how we keep that in programming is exactly that. Making sure, always checking in, always making sure that the youth are relating with whatever material you're teaching and the way that you are teaching it, making sure that even those that are coming in, and I think this is a big piece, the instructors themselves also have an understanding of who they are coming to speak to. Oftentimes, they don't have that lens. So who is it that you're bringing to speak to your youth? And specifically, if they're speaking to Black youth, can they relate to them? Can they relate to their experiences? Can they speak their language? That's really important, because that's how they're going to be able to, again.
One point I'll just add to that is internal infrastructure. What you just described is not something that one person can hold, right? So making sure that if that's your intention, you are coming with the supports that you need to make that thrive, right? So I love all of those things, but it's also very, you can make, on paper, you can make the most, the widest program. You go to apply that with one person and 30 youth, good luck to you. Yeah.
I think that's another thing, right? You don't take more than what you can chew. You don't bite more than what you can chew. And so it goes back again that if you're going to do person-centered, is making sure you have the team or the capacity to be able to support that work. So yes, 100%.
Oh, I was just going to add to Biliana's comment that the one thing that I always emphasize in the work, even for myself when I was frontline, is asking those questions, asking those tough questions during our asset needs assessment. That's one of the questions that we have, like, what is your learning style? How do you learn? When you were in school, what were some of the academic problems that you had? Or what are some difficulties that you've noticed about yourself? And just having those tough conversations initially. And even with sometimes those conversations, someone is not ready to reveal to you, whatever their academic issues maybe they might have experienced in the past, maybe due to academic trauma, or whatever they might have experienced when they were in school. So, I always emphasize, even for myself, just being really observant, and observing and watching body language when the technical trainers are doing their facilitation. Like, what is the participant sitting in a corner? Do they seem removed from what is being taught? Do they look lost? Do they look down because they're just not understanding what's going on? or, are they being really animated? Are they trying to cover it up? Like, go to the person, pull them aside, ask questions, ask them what's going on, ask them how you can help them, and then try different things until you find something that might work for the person. And then also having the conversation with the participant, like, is it okay to share this with the technical trainer? Can we go to them and talk to them about some of the difficulties that you're having, so that this person that is training you can be well aware that this is going on with you, so that they can make the accommodations necessary to make sure that hopefully you'll be successful with whatever it is that you are being taught. So I really am a deep believer in just having conversations and getting to know the person as much as they will let you in, so that you can support them with whatever barrier they might be experiencing. But also that's all, based on whether the person is ready to share or not. But I think really just being observant is half the battle, of this work.
And I'll just add, so this conversation is definitely from the perspective of a fully formed powerhouse program that Biliana and Bunmi are talking about. So encouraging folks who are maybe watching that you can start out small, and you can start out where you are, and you can evaluate what you're doing and use that to continue to build upon and add those puzzle pieces as you go to make your programming more effective. Bunmi's team are all talented, either social workers or social service workers or psychotherapists. So the questions in which Bunmi is applying, there's trained professionals there, and Biliana's team, trauma-informed, adult learning styles are applied, because again, when we talk about youth, especially the youth that we were working with, they have a lot of things that are solidified. So adult learning training is important there as well. So this is a stage that you can get to, but just know starting out at that stage is not going to be always effective, because you have to build those pieces in, and evaluation will really help. Shequita, what's your thoughts on this question?
So for me, what has been really helpful is in this conversation is arts-based learning and arts-based pieces. I really love popular education models or modalities in working, and so you work with the expertise in the room and ask folks in arts-based ways. And so to get to some of those needs that you talked about, Biliana, around communication style, one thing I really love about the arts is that those elements emerge, right? And it's oftentimes non-traditional ways of accessing information that you see, different parts of individuals, typically that have oftentimes may not have had the best educational learning experiences. And so arts-based ways of doing a play, a skit, a poem, and also doing arts-based evaluation, right? And so it's a direct result of how you can gain feedback in multiple ways. So I think about having arts-based elements infused as part of your program to deeper richen the experience for all participants, and through that feedback will happen. So whether, again, it's surveys, informal conversations, I think sometimes after every session, just even asking 3 questions, right, gives you information. Anything gives information. So, what did you like about the program today, or what resonated with you? What were some things that we could improve on, right? What's something that really shifted your mindset in how you worked? Things like that allows for inquiry-based participation, and you can do that in drawing, write me a poem, do interpretive dance, whatever it is, but it's an opportunity to gauge feedback, and it can be infused seamlessly into programming that then rolls up into our larger outcome models later on. So I think about arts as a deep entry point for that. I've run girls groups, book clubs, and we were reading some really dense books that young people chose, and they're like, I want to take this on. but we did it in arts-based ways that resonated. We draw a Pictionary depiction of the whole book, and folks were able to unpack it in meaningful ways to them, right? And so I think about that as also information in improvement in program.
I love those things. I think also, from a young age, learning is a requirement, but breathing air into that, learning is successful when there's trust is super important. And I think that ties into everything that you guys are saying, looking at different modalities of connection so that you can then apply learning rather than saying this is a requirement. That really allows youth and anyone learning really to like expand their mind on the topics when they know that they're going to be taken care of within that learning experience. And that doesn't mean that you're holding hand the whole way. That just means you're breathing life for them to accept, that you care about how they're accepting that knowledge. So yeah, I think there's a huge element of trust within learning.
Absolutely.
We're going to take a break and we'll come back and continue the conversation.
All right. Thank you.
Greetings, everyone. I'm Kofi Hope.
Hi, everybody. My name is Shireen Ashman.
And we are co-founders for the CEE Centre for Young Black Professionals. And today we want to talk a little bit about CEE's journey. So the history of CEE really goes back to 2005, the year of the gun, which is, to be honest, an emotional time to think about, especially with where we are in 2020 with gun violence in community. And having seen a few of those cycles, but at that time, it was a year that was incredibly traumatic. So many young Black men and women lost their lives. I was a student and advocate at the time, and so many of us in community were saying, we need a real response, and a response that invests in youth and actually understands Black youth aren't the problem here, but the solution. And with the right supports, we can actually turn the tide around these issues. And from that was birthed, the Youth Challenge Fund and a series of responses, but YCF specifically one about supporting new initiatives that could be led by Black youth, focused around meeting the needs of young Black men and women who are facing barriers. And so when I came back to Canada, I was overseas, I was approached around a project, what they called a legacy project of the Youth Challenge Fund, and asked if I could start assembling a team and getting folks together to build an organization that could have an impact around these issues. And so CEE really started in 2012 in the Jane Finch community. We spent a year doing research, trying to figure out, what was the right place for us to be to create economic opportunities and move youth forward in a way that was actually authentic to what young people were looking at in their lives.
And for me, as a survivor of gun violence, connecting with Kofi around this issue was of huge importance to me. I wanted to do work in this area, not specifically around how do I kind of heal communities from gun violence, but how do I help Black youth to discover and uncover their talents so that they don't have to see that type of avenue as the only way, and how do I help them to kind of rediscover their talent. And that's one side of it, but also demonstrate to the larger public that Black youth is a talent pool that is untapped. And it definitely requires their investment, not only financial investment, but leadership investment, and looking at how do we bring that to the fore in a very practical way. And a lot of the curriculum was around exposure, like exposing Black youth to different avenues, different opportunities, different industries in which they probably have not maybe explored before, and even exposing Black youth to different spaces in their own city. Kofi is always the leader in terms of bringing us into nature and teaching us about different plants and etc. So it was just always important for me that level of exposure is there.
Yeah.
Right? Not only for industry, but as a person, like building the whole person. is I think, and I continue to think, that really sound career that is long lasting happens when the person feels whole, right? And when they know what their different strengths are, and when they have a system of support of folks, whether that's inside of their communities or outside of their communities, but just a system of social capital that they can go to say, hey, like, I have this problem, or I need to figure out how to system navigate this thing. And to this day, I still get calls from some of my members that I worked with in 2012, 2013, around like, okay, this thing is happening at work, Shireen, like, what do you think I should do?
We are the CEE Centre for Young Black Professionals.
Committed to cultivating a talent pool of young Black professionals
that positively impacts
the Canadian labor market.
Welcome back. Thank you for sticking with us. I want to share the mic now. I want to pass it to Biliana. And do you have some questions?
I do. And this has been so insightful for me as well. So I'm just happy to be able to sit alongside both of you. So I think we've been talking a lot about social supports and getting some of your expertise in it. So just seeing how social supports and other mental health resources can be vital in assisting Black youth to be able to meaningfully engage in programming. Can you maybe expand on how you hope that this will create a positive experience for youth during and after programming?
So I can maybe start there. I think of programming for me is part of a web, right? And I'm visual, so I always think in like visual ways. And so I think of young people being at the core of that, and all of the social supports that are required to build, like, support the holistic being. So maybe the programming is addressing, for example, maybe it's about building skills in employment, right? What are the other wraparound supports that are required for that holistic person, right? Perhaps the programming is supporting people who are in finding housing options. And so because of that, how do we anchor folks in a community where other community members are that can be mentors, sponsors for them, build their social capital and networks, right? Especially in that. So when the program ends, the skills and the people still are connected to the young person within that, right? And we know we are all working in funding constraints, right? And so there's always maybe an end date to things. And so I'm always trying to think about not building models of dependency that depends just on this program. And then the other piece around that is, how do we build, you know, in the housing space, we always say, like, when you leave here, you should know 10 other people who you're able to call on if you need something, right? And so when you're placed in a new community, do you know someone in the grocery market? Do you know someone who can support around like legal? Do you know someone like a dentist, family doctor, primary care? So it's that web of support that, yeah, you can know Shequita, I'll be here, but who else do you know, right? And so I think about, after the program ends, how does that we continue to really allow folks to thrive in spaces outside of the actual immediate core?
Yeah, I agree with pretty much like everything you just said. I think, you know, I'm circling back to my do with and not do for, and, you know, journeying along so that you are teaching the youth how to do what you're doing for them, so that they're able to do it for themselves, and they're able to learn how to advocate for themselves, and they're able to identify the barriers that they're experiencing, so that when you, and I say you as the social worker or the support person, are no longer there, then they are able to do it for themselves. because I've been in this field for a long time, there has been an evolution from the time I started, like in the early 2000s to now, where case managers were like super, you're like super case manager. You want to save the world and be the savior. And then you find that the people that you're serving are developing learned helplessness, and how that is not serving, it's not serving them. So, with time and with just watching the people I serve, and just identifying that I'm not helping them by doing everything for them, that, it's really important to serve, the community, but also like not make them helpless so that they're always dependent on you. So that, so it's really important that, as you're supporting people, it's not, you're not just doing it for them, you're doing it with them so that, they learn how to help themselves when they do experience that in the future and you are not there. Because, we cannot always say that we as support people are going to be here. We as, grassroots organizations are going to be, we're going to get funding next year. We just don't know what's going to happen. So we have to make sure that the people that we're serving, that we're not leaving them to the wolves. That whatever it is that we're doing, for them, that they know how to do it for themselves when we're not here. And so those mental health resources that we're providing, and whatever resources that we're providing for them, it's really important that we are teaching how we're getting this information so that they know that, oh, I can call 211 and say, this is what I'm seeking. Can you please provide this information for me? And those are conversations I have with youth all the time when I'm doing counseling, that, hey, I called this number and they gave me this information. I want you to write down this number. So next time you're experiencing this, and maybe I'm on vacation or someone is not available, it's in the middle of the night, you can access this yourself. Because I don't want it to be that because I'm not here, you don't know what to do and you don't have anyone to help you. So I think it's really important to just to foster independence, because the youth that we are supporting are adults. And we want to, we want to help in their personal development. And I think it's an important aspect of personal development to teach people how to do things for themselves. And this is an important aspect of, of the work that we do.
I think I'll just add that both of the youth demographics that you guys work with are disenfranchised, like in a very serious way, living in a city, like the biggest capitalist city in Canada, right? And so you're having to teach community, like reteach community to disenfranchise youth. And that's like a very hard thing to do, but also a very meaningful thing to do, right? Because then those issues that they're facing can be reduced in the mental capacity. And so, yeah, like agreed with all of the things that you guys are saying, because it's very hard to see how you can begin to shift things for yourself if you're not connected to community, if you're not connected to resources. And then from there, we have now taught youth how they can begin to develop community for themselves, right? So that's the biggest takeaway. The biggest takeaway is when we see youth coming through our programming who are now starting their own grassroots initiative or starting their own businesses, and they're building them within community. Bunmi specifically has been doing some of that work recently in entrepreneurship program, guiding youth to put on community projects and engage with their community to build those deeper roots, right?
And I'll add, I think organizations and specifically workers that are able to do that are in the mindset of it's really about the youth versus just me and my caseload. Because I think one thing we've also experienced in the past is where it's one organization versus another, when really that's not the case. We're all working together, we're all service providers, and I think when we're able to be like, I don't have all the resources, I have to be able to tell you that this organization can do this for you where I cannot. I think that allows us to partner with other organizations, support the work that they're also doing, while, of course, having the youth in mind and knowing that they'll do better than anything that I can do here. And I think that is also a really good takeaway because, again, there are all these resources available. Every organization might do it differently as long as you're making sure that it meets the needs of that youth that you are supporting. And I'll pass it back to you, Trynée.
Thanks, Biliana. I'd like to ask, what kind of indicators are used to deliver quantitative and qualitative data about Black youth experience and programming? And what happens to it after it's collected?
All right. So I always start with, for me, and in programming, the social determinants of health, right? So what are the conditions of well-being? And when we're thinking about indicators, what are the social indicators around race, gender, food security, employment outcomes? How are those things being improved? What are the purpose points of the program that feed into that? Maybe it's around literacy, education, really looking at reducing poverty in all its facets. And so those are some of the indicators that you would look at. And then you're looking at the end of your program, what are some of the attitudinal shifts, some of the behavioral shifts, right? Have folks increased capacity in areas? Have we reduced, food insecurity by X number, right? So thinking about the ways in which those indicators are connected to the tangible program. And then first off, also asking and engaging with young people around that, right? And then you're looking at how does this compare up to larger or other programs that are happening, right? So I think about those social indicators, the social determinants of health, as well as what happens to the data was your second piece of the question. How are we using that to further improve our program outcomes, right? So we've collected all this beautiful data, we've sent it to the funder. Is that the end of the conversation or the cycle, right? And so I think about sometimes we tend to be very reactive based on just this funding is coming out, but how do we make the data work for us, right? And with community. And if it's purpose-driven, then the funding may shift, but the purpose remains of what are the conditions of well-being that we're improving within the community. And so we've gathered this data that was supported by this funding, but the conversation still continues, right? And so how do we use that data to say, well, we've seen in the last 2 street needs assessment that the indicators for Black youth in housing and homeless populations are increasing, or they're at the highest risk. What does it tell us when we're doing culturally responsive programming to support the holistic beings of young people, right? And so that's some of the work that's been happening in spaces, is really continuing having a data and evidence-informed driven way of looking at the social indicators. And ultimately, how are we reducing poverty? Like ultimately, when I think of my blue sky big question, all of these indicators is how do I reduce poverty and the outcomes within that?
I think also not being afraid of just the second part of your question, Trynée, of letting your data influence where you're applying for funds and where you're reporting to. Because I think what we tend to do is we shape our programming in order to match the funds because we want to receive it. But how can we do the other way around? Because truthfully, what the data is showing us is what the needs within our communities are. And so we should be able to be very bold. And I know that not everyone will go with it, but there are people and there are funders that will be like, we see the data, we see the research, we see the need, and we will be willing to make some tweaks here and there. So using that also to influence your funds, to influence where you're applying for.
I 100% agree with you. I think it's really important to not only take the data, but listen to it. and know that it should drive the future of of the programming. And I believe in mixed methods. So get the data in different ways, like you said, quantitative, qualitative. But even when you're doing the qualitative, not just like getting voice recordings, like allowing for the youth to be creative in the way that they're given data, whether it is doing videos, whether it is, like you had talked about, bringing in art, and maybe journaling, just different ways of being able to express their feedback, so that we can use that as indicators, to predict how we're going to drive programming for the future. I think it's a way of being able to evaluate the success and the continuation of how you want to position yourself when it comes to programming for Black youth. I think it's so important to continuously go back to the Black youth that you're serving and ask them questions and listen to them when they tell you things, and provide opportunity for them to tell you things in various ways so that they're able to express themselves in the ways that they feel comfortable. And then we are able to hopefully take that information and use it for the future, the youth that we're serving in the future, even if it's not for the particular youth that provided the information to us.
So, okay, I might say something kind of controversial here, but I think that there is great responsibility in the collection of data.
Yes.
And oftentimes, the request to share your data is like, oh, well, this is a major, let's go over here, sometimes the spread of knowledge that could be re-traumatizing to a community is done unintentionally. And so I very strongly believe in the piece that you said, Biliana, is partnering and sharing that information with those who respect it and uphold the manner in which it was collected, specifically speaking for marginalized groups. Because your program participants and the graduates of your program are not show ponies. Mm-hmm. They are real people. Mm-hmm. And so what we're doing may not be for everyone, and that's fine. We can say no at any point in time when you draw a line that we are not comfortable crossing, and that's fine. When you live your authentic self, whether it's an organization, whether it's you personally, you will pull in, the gravity will pull in what is meant to be. And there's ebbs and flows through all of life. And just because you had a year that had less funding doesn't mean it wasn't a successful year. So there's extreme responsibility in that data and how it's shared and where it goes. Also, even in the stages of collection, you want to be careful around who's collecting what, like what that relationship is. So if there's sensitive questions that need to be asked, that they're not asked in a blind survey, that maybe they go and have that private conversation. You want to make sure that all your T's are crossed and your I's are dotted in that collection. And then you want to make sure that there's permission to share. Not every outcome. Exactly. So Shequita said is shareable. And so I really do believe in moving with intention and responsibility through every step and not just doing something because someone has required it for you. No matter what check is written, you do have the power to say, let's shift here, let's shift there. And if you come prepared with that shift of the why, you are going to be respected even more. So just know that your voice is valuable regardless of that dollar sign that's attached to it. You will affect the process on their end. So use that power, use that responsibility that comes with all those pieces.
I just wanted to add one thing. Oftentimes, to your point around how data is used and oftentimes exploited in communities, in Black communities, it's so also important to have a ethics around data, right? And so is there a committee that talks through how data is used, how data is shared, to your point. Because we've seen when folks have, or in partnerships or partnerships break down, where there is a power imbalance, right, within either community grassroots spaces, with larger academic institutions that get information, valuable information that oftentimes catapult different research topics. And I oftentimes think of what is the social exchange for community and Black youth in that process. Are Black youth the researchers or being researched on? Right, in the data, that reciprocity. One project that was really cool that we worked on in my time when I worked at METRAC is oftentimes at the end of any cycle of program, we would do participatory action research. And so young people did the research. They drove the outcomes and they picked a topic, very interesting topics, but they picked the topics that were really beautiful and challenged it. So there were advocacy pieces, and they learned all the components to do research. So out of that, they wrote a report, whether it's to the principal in the education system, or they were petitioning in front of I think it was a big box store around how young people are hyper surveillanced when they walk through to get through to the mall. And so the impact of, I often think of who are the researchers and where is the data coming to and from, and what does that power imbalance look like? And so that for me.
Okay, that just gave me shivers of like switching that paradigm of like, what are you evaluating? Like, have you asked the participants, like, what, like, you just come up with questions, like, arbitrarily?
Yeah.
Like, that's crazy. That just shifted so many things in my head. Well, you might ask it what you think is an open question of, like, what was your experience in this program? Like, that's not enough, right? And so allowing participants to craft what has sat with them and how they want to present. Wow, like that was so, yeah, that was crazy.
I have one more thing to add. I think it's really important to definitely very much protect our youth. If, you know, if like, for example, a funder is, you know, going to be surveying them, we definitely need to ask questions about what they're, you know, what they're going to be doing and how it's going to be delivered, just to make sure that we are, because they have access because of us. So it's really important to do that work ahead of the access that we're given to the youth that we're serving. One, and two, how are the youth going to be compensated for their time? Because you see people, you know, requesting to do focus groups with, you know, with youth that, you know, they've given, you know, funding for, or, you know, provided grants for, but they're not offering any compensation. You know, and they clearly know that the funding that they've provided might be connected to people getting jobs, which means in order for them to engage in the focus group or whatever you're asking them to do, it's time. It's time away from their jobs. So therefore, they're missing out on income. So how are you compensating?
Absolutely.
And
very
equality
important.
in compensation.
Exactly. Very much so. Yeah.
I think this is a good segue into the next question. And it's, again, just talking about how youth are often encouraged to share their life stories and be vulnerable early on in programming and even at the end. So how do we ensure that youth's wellness and interests are protected during those collaborative and partnership stages of exactly everything that you've just spoken about?
Okay, I can start. So one thing in the shelter space, oftentimes that was happening, is that, you know, in traditional models of fundraising, is typically you hear from young people about their experiences. And sometimes in the work that we do, we see people at very fragmented parts of their lives, right? And And I'm really mindful of how, even though we're running programs, we become sometimes those gatekeepers or stewards in that. And so regardless of if we're Black or not, in those moments of how we hold space. And so typically sometimes what would happen or may happen is in those exchanges, young people would feel so grateful for the services that they had received that they would share, right? They would share full and big parts of themselves. But then a day later, they would retreat. We won't hear from them, and they would go away. And I think about those moments where because they feel like, first off, housing is a human right, let me just say that, but it doesn't come or equate to someone's story, and how storytelling is oftentimes cataloged or used for fundraising. Like all of our programs are designed based on these things. So I think about the responsibility of agencies around what that means. And so a tangible piece was, if young people were in our programs, we're not going to ask them to share their stories in that way, because in that context, we're seeing them in housing, right? And it's a very much lived, current experience. Now, maybe perhaps you go away and you have some distance years later. That's a different paradigm, right? But I'm mindful of how our stories live on the internet. Things don't go away in this day and age. And so what if I don't want my story shared 2 years later? I've overcome that moment, or it doesn't show me in the best, most authentic light. What does that mean for retracting my consent? So I think about that, just given the breadth of programming that I've experienced and work with, is what is our duty of care and obligation as service providers when data is being asked for or on behalf of young people.
So I actually had the privilege of attending a fundraising conference, because let's be real about this specific subject. A lot of this is tied to money. And it should be tied to representation, right? So oftentimes, and that's not saying that we're doing it incorrectly, but that's just saying in doing what we intend to do for representation, we get pulled to the money aspect as well. Oh, well, you have those stories, can you share them with us? And so for me, authentically to collect those stories, it's for representation. So folks can know what, who are experiencing the same thing, who can know what's possible, who can know that they have the ability to write their story. And so I was at a conference recently, and they were talking about the ethics around fundraising, and those guidelines that have been written and that funders abide by are tied to how people give money, right? So they see a child in a picture who is looking like, I know this from my experience being born and raised in Canada, just in the 90s, what the stereotypes around AIDS or Africa look like, and how you could raise money for those things. But why is it that we are asking people to resonate with an image rather than understanding the issue? So I think that we need to actively separate the two, and we do representation stories for our youth, and for fundraising, we get you to understand the issue. Right? And that still might look like sharing stories, but in a different way, a less maybe, because sharing stories are difficult. And if you know that you're sharing your story with someone who doesn't understand you, you're instantly going to feel judged. So how about maybe you just understand the issue, and you don't, just because you gave money doesn't mean you gain access to someone's story. So I think about those things when we talk about this subject, yeah.
And I also think about, like, instead of just sharing the story of the struggle, sharing the story of the success and how they came out. Because oftentimes we are just sharing the struggle. And I think what you spoke about, like, which point and where are we sharing it? And maybe when our youth are most vulnerable is not the right time for us to take advantage of that moment to be like, okay, can you now write everything that you just told me down? Or can I record this because it's gonna look good on the application or so? But maybe at the end of programming where they feel empowered, they feel like they've received all the resources, might be a point where they're actually in a better place to share some of the things that they would have experienced and to share how that changed their lives. And another conversation that we have had with our funders is, when we are collecting stories, because oftentimes funding is tied to a timeline, and that timeline, if it's coming to an end, you have to do everything that you need to, but can we reimagine that timeline and reimagine that maybe our youth success is not at the end of programming, maybe it's 2 years down the line, like what you said, and how are we still engaging with them? Because oftentimes we just forget about it. If the timeline is ended, it's like that story is no longer important, but the truth is, it's still important because it's a continuum. It does not end where the funding ends. It's a life that we're looking at versus just a participant going
Yeah,
through
like
a
a
program.
13-week program is not going to change someone's life. It's going to, like, they're not going to become on the Forbes list after a 13-week program.
What?
So, yeah, like, they're not going to get the Nobel Peace Prize after a 13-week program. So just like, yeah, like calling out the realities of what the intention of the program is supposed to do. It's supposed to add to someone's life. It's supposed to crack something open, but it's not like we're talking about humans. We're not talking about computer programs that a bug can be fixed with application of a program, right? So I love that, Biliana.
I think it's important to, when having conversations or broaching topics that you know is going to lead to conversations, and for the participants to become vulnerable and to share things that might be sensitive. You're dealing with sensitive topics. I think it's always great to just kind of let them know that whatever you're sharing, you have to make sure that you're comfortable with sharing this, and that that this is something that you're okay with other people knowing about you, because and just keep making sure that you as a facilitator, whenever you're facilitating, you're reminding the youth that yes, this is a vulnerable time for you and you want to share this story, but remember that you might be in a room with other people that you do not know. And also, one of the major conversations we have in facilitation is making sure that everyone is holding each other's story sacred, and you are keeping whatever happens in this room stays within this room and just amongst us. And you're not going to take this story and gossip with each other about the thing that this person has shared, but just making sure that that this is not going to be brought up in other spaces, and having those conversations with the youth that you're serving in that particular space to help them understand the sensitivity of being in a group and sharing vulnerable stories. And so, these are conversations I've had as as a facilitator when having to lead conversations like this, not, for recording purposes or anything like that, just in general and just being human. Like, are you sure this is something you want to share with a group of people that do not know you? One, and two, are you going to regret this tomorrow? So, so it's really important to have those conversations. And whenever our youth have to present in public, this happened a few months back. There were several coaching sessions that went into preparing the youth and just making sure that you're going to be sharing this in public. Is this the story that you want to share in public? Is this a story that when it's recorded, you're going to feel okay watching this? So because I do not want to re-traumatize you. So it's really important to have these conversations and have these preparations whenever our youth are going to be exposed, because we have to protect them. That's our job. And so that's my take on that.
I was just also gonna add to that. I'm really curious about how funding applications support that. And the reality is oftentimes they ask for the story, but not the support or care that goes into actually, what are the ethical considerations around storytelling or what that means, right? And so to your point around, I really love the idea around how do we share themes, issues, not person or Shequita went through this thing that was, but what are the social pieces connected and laddering up to that, connected to it. And I really think the type of program also determines the type of maybe disclosures that comes or storytellings that happens, right? So yeah, really interesting. I could talk about this one all day.
Me
clearly.
too. And like one thing that's bubbling up for me right now is the option for different modalities of storytelling. Can we have youth mentorship? Is that an option for storytelling, right? So that we can lead by example rather than lead by trauma, right? I love this conversation. We're gonna take a quick break and we'll be right back.
Five seconds. That's all it takes for your first impression of me. Know how long it takes to shake it off? A lifetime. But I'm not waiting. I've got dreams to build. Places to be. Bias will not slow me down. Injustice won't define me. Nor a narrative written in a time before me. I'm here to show you who I really am. Nobody knows what it takes like I do. Like we do. It's time for the world not to just look at us, but to see us. It's time for the world to know that no matter what, Black youth can.
Thank you for coming along with us on this journey. This conversation has been greatly impactful for myself. So thank you for joining me and having this conversation. The work in which we do, often we're in a race, right? And so having the opportunity to stop, have these conversations, not only will impact our work, but I hope also the people who are watching today. I want to add one last question before we wrap up. What are strategies and practices that are essential to have if youth are experiencing mental health crisis during programming? And how do we help them use tools and techniques to maneuver through those challenging moments?
I think one thing I've realized is the importance of not just having one person that's trained to manage a crisis, but making sure that there are multiple people in your organization or in your programming that are able to do that, because the truth is a mental health breakdown or a crisis can happen at any moment. Yes. And how are we making sure that we have someone there that's able to or equipped to support the youth during that time? So I think my first thing is training, making sure that our staff are well trained in being able to manage the crisis for our youth. And then that will lead into us just being adequate to support them when a health crisis does happen. So that's one tool I think we could use.
I think it's important for the whole team to work together. When a youth is experiencing crisis and they've made us aware of the crisis that they're experiencing, I think it's really important for everyone that is providing the wraparound supports and has access to the youth to come together and have a consultation on what is the action plan in how to support this person, and make sure that you're constantly in conversation as the person is being supported, to make sure that you're constantly checking in with each other if anything has been observed that might be different from each other's observations so that you are managing the process as it's happening. Because I think that's one of the things that, definitely is really important. Communication as a team is essential when you're managing a crisis. And so having those meetings, those consultation, we call them case consults here. As soon as we identify that there is a participant that is experiencing a crisis, we call a case consultation. The staff let us know that there is something going on. We need to discuss this with you. We come together as a team and we problem solve and develop an action plan. And then the team will go back to the youth and have a conversation with them and say, okay, we know you're experiencing this crisis. How would you like to approach this? And if this is something that the youth at the time, because of the crisis, mental health crisis they might be experiencing, cannot quantify or express how they want to approach it, then we have an action plan to support them along the way as they're trying to resolve this crisis that they're experiencing. So that's one thing that we found really works for us, just working as a team, making sure that we're in constant communication to support the person and making sure that we're using all the resources that are available to us within our community. We are not the end all and be all. This is a big city and there are so many community organizations that are doing amazing things. If the whatever is needed is not here, there are other people that can provide it and might be even doing it better than we are. And it's really important to tap into those and make that accessible to the youth so that they can get what they need, so that they can experience wellness and be able to feel supported, even if they're not able to continue with programming. It's just essential to know that we are, that they know that we are here for them.
Absolutely. Thanks so much for that. I agree with everything. For me, I think about, when we started this conversation, we started by really asking what are some of the consideration and how do we center wellness? I think about starting at the beginning. And so starting at the beginning is also checking in with young people around, if you experience crisis, what does that look like for support for you? Kind of like building out a safety plan, right? And so we're not waiting for something to happen. We are just we're understanding that in the span of life, we all will have challenges around what wellness looks like. And so if we plan for that, we know who their support person are on file. We know what needs are key considerations for them. Depending on the scale and magnitude of what that looks like. And so we're planning for that as part of the process. And then in your care plan, case consults, consideration around who is someone that is a trusted individual that young person can be a part of that care conference with. Right? So they're actually a part of that conversation with someone who they feel is in their corner, right? Or who have seen them, or, maybe I'm new to them and they're concerned of how we might see them in that moment. So this is more around the follow-up. In the immediate moment, I agree with everything, having folks trained, supported, but I think about starting at the beginning and building it in, because then in crisis, sometimes it's also supporting around what options are available, right? And so we usually shut down, and so having that space.
I like that you said starting at the beginning, and for me, I think, and actually shout out to Bunmi, because Bunmi always checks me when I use the word resiliency. And so often folks don't even know what a crisis is, specifically Black folks. We don't know what a crisis is. We don't know what those tools are because we've never been afforded the opportunity to say, I'm having a crisis. So that's the beginning for me. So shout out to SST who can take the time to have a conversation, to be what are some things that might lead to and also you're having a crisis. A crisis could look like many, many things. Mentally, physically, financially, spiritually, your family dynamics, all of these things, right? And not all of them are going to be solvable, but if you can provide a tool, a community to support that. But like the first step for me is like letting folks know that they can have a crisis. You can have a crisis. The option is for you to apply those tools to solve that crisis or live within that crisis, whatever that looks like. And your spot here is not jeopardized. Like we're not going to forget your name. You're a person to us. So like allowing folks to just know that they're in a crisis.
It's not conditional.
Exactly.
And the resiliency piece isn't, okay, you're going to be at programming on Monday at 9 a.m. Like, right?
What, pick ourselves up by our own bootstraps, you know?
Exactly.
Yeah,
so
figure it out, move on.
Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah,
I appreciate this so much. I hope that this has resonated with me today, and I hope that it resonates with our listeners. I know I'm going to take so many things away from this conversation, and I'm just thankful for the opportunity to sit with you guys and talk with you ladies and talk about these meaningful subjects. Just want to give a huge shout out to City of Toronto again for supporting this project, and our behind the scenes, our director, Ivano, always doing the work. And our co-producers, Matthias, and my name is on this paper, but I'm going to give the shout out to Matthias. Just thank you, C, as well, for aiding us in this project. We will be back with a few other episodes, so hopefully you can tune into those as well. But just thank you, everyone. It's been a great conversation.